I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Russell Brand's fans have been terrified for all of 7 days that he was being silenced. Well, after a week of what seems like a voluntary silence, he's back, looking quite serious, looking quite sober. Russell Brand has just posted another video on YouTube and Rumble. It's barely over 3 minutes long, and what he says is exactly what I predicted would be the next stage of this conversation. As I say, isn't he controlling the narrative or trying to control the narrative? And so in terms of this stage, let's talk about the corrupt media on Rumble. And he invites his followers to follow him there and make contributions there. And of course, we've all heard about Rumble. It's the beacon for truth-telling, and its reputation precedes it. Let's talk about conspiracies involving the mainstream media on Rumble. Let's talk about the corrupt media doing questionable things on a platform that is more flexible about the sort of content and content creators it allows on its platform. This is an indirect way of undermining what's being said about him without dealing with those things directly or specifically. And that conversation will fall on fallow ground. There's a very receptive audience waiting to hear that story. Before we get to the rest of the analysis here, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I don't do live shows, and as a result, I don't really earn super chats. So if you're enjoying my analysis, please hit the thanks button. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. Now, in the first few seconds of his video, he thanks his supporters for questioning, quote, the information you've been presented with. Now, in a previous video, I spoke about the sort of kind of clumsy legalese, the sort of language that just doesn't seem natural language, right? And you might say, what is wrong with that statement? But let me say that again. Thank you for questioning the information you've been presented with. It's kind of vague. If you were watching this video without, let's say you'd come back from a trip to the moon and you were watching this video, you would probably not know what is going on or why this departure from YouTube. All you would know is, thanks for questioning the information you've been presented with. What information? Pertaining to what? About what? Something serious has happened, and all we know is that it's based on information that you've been presented with. Where? By who? Regarding what? In sum, Brand is elected to avoid talking about the very things that are being said about him, that have been said about him for the past week. There's not a peep in this 3-minute thing. Not the word refute hasn't been mentioned anywhere this time. There's no denial here anywhere. There's no comment about how angry he is to be falsely accused. There's no word about lawsuits either. Not long ago, I said Brand should absolutely sue if what's been said about him isn't true, if it's spurious, if it's mischievous, or if he feels defamed. Interestingly, Brand did refer to media law briefly during his 3-minute monologue a couple of hours ago, and he also presented this slide, which refers to a landmark lawsuit accusing the mainstream media of forming a coalition to censor misinformation. Apparently, this is a bad thing. Now, I'm sure many will leap on the word coalition and shout, "See, I told you, it's a conspiracy." Well, coalition actually means something else. Usually, often, typically, it means something positive. My personal view is that social media platforms ought to form a similar coalition that is about incentivizing truth, when I say truth, providing more realistic and fact-based content, even though it's far easier for channels to become bulging cash cows by sensationalizing, by fear-mongering, by exaggerating claims in their content. And to some extent, that's already happened. To some extent, the big platforms have been warned not to allow certain comments to be made that, according to the powers that be, are truthful, are honest, are fact-based, are scientific. So we've already seen that sort of thing taking place. I also agree that there is a real rivalry between trusted news media, which in the quote, when I read that quote, I read it to mean the media that involves reporters, editors, journalists, not keyboard warriors. I'm not saying keyboard warriors aren't capable of telling the truth, but there's a difference between going out into the world and reporting to an editor and being paid a salary. And if you make mistakes or you express opinions that are not rational, then your salary might depend on that, on whether what you're saying is resonates with reality. And so they've got to stick to a code of conduct. And so what I would say is that I think there is a rivalry between them and digital platforms, who also have standards, but those standards are very different. I would say, as someone who's worked on both sides, that those standards are slack by comparison. And of course, any creator can decide how high to apply his own standards. And I feel like my channel and me personally, I've got pretty high standards in terms of reporting. And that is one of the reasons why I wrote about 100 books, was in the end I sort of thought, well, are my standards sufficient to make this, make these narratives valuable? And then the ball was then in your court. It would be up to you guys to decide, to read what I was saying, to see whether my contributions made sense, were sensible, and upheld a certain amount of standards. And because you guys seem to feel that they did, I continued writing. And I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet by saying this. I'm simply saying that some creators are kind of self-starters and hold themselves to a certain level, certain standards. It might have to do with your upbringing. It might have to do with your default settings in terms of morality. It might have to do with ethics. But what is also definitely true online is that there's a lot more easy money in distorting the truth. There's a lot more easy money in sensationalizing. And you see this all the time, especially in true crime, that the more sensational, shocking stories that aren't true do far more than the stories that rationally and reasonably debunk those stories or tell it like it more likely is. So that is why I say I actually think social media platforms ought to form a similar coalition, incentivizing truth. And it will mean that they make less money, that they incentivize more realistic and fact-based content. It will mean that the audience will be somewhat constrained and I think constricted, and I can actually see their revenues contracting. And, we live in a world where who in their right mind would volunteer to have their income contract, volunteer to do that? And that is, I think, one of the questions surrounding climate change, surrounding the population of the planet Earth. Are we going to volunteer to do what we probably have to do, or are we going to be forced to do it? Do you agree that there's a real rivalry between trusted news media and digital platforms? Do you agree that the standards are slack by comparison? Would you say that the standards on social media are higher than in the news media? Because I would say that the standards on YouTube are higher than those on Rumble, that those on Rumble are slack compared to those on YouTube. And I mean, isn't it, if you go and look at the terms and conditions, isn't that a matter of fact? I don't know. But coming back to taking the law into one's own hands, I mean, in terms of litigation, did you know that 9 years ago Brand did exactly that? He sued the Sun for libel and apparently won a 5-figure sum. He sued them and he won. Guess what triggered that lawsuit? The unthinkable, preposterous and ludicrous claim that Brand had cheated on his girlfriend. Now, quoting from The Guardian from 2014, following publication, Mr. Brand immediately wrote to the Sun, right? So just compare the allegations this time around and his response to the allegations that time around and his response. He immediately wrote to the Sun on Sunday, on the very day the article came out, through his solicitors Harbottle and Lewis, who informed the newspaper that the claims were false, that they should be withdrawn, and that an apology should be published. That's pretty quick. That's someone who's pretty assertive. That's someone who has lawyers who are on the ball. It's strange how different things are 9 years later. Maybe things are still forming. Maybe things are still in process. Brand is married, a father. He's already been terminated from all sorts of platforms and arrangements. And as far as we know, there are no lawsuits in the offing, even though the accusations this time round are several orders of magnitude worse than simply cheating on his girlfriend, which was the allegation in 2014. This time round, Brand has so much more to lose, doesn't he? According to The Guardian, soon after, Brand wrote a Guardian piece about the pain, disruption and distress inflicted by the Sun on him and his girlfriend. And he doesn't really mention much of that in this 3-minute piece, where he could talk about, the pain of being maligned, the pain of being accused unfairly, the fact that he's been silenced and he can't give his side of the story. Well, this is his chance to do that. And in the past, he wrote to The Guardian about that. In this case, I think he spends 10 seconds just saying it's been a distressful week, and then he continues talking about other things.
Obviously, it's been an extraordinary and distressing week.
He basically mentions it for about 3 seconds. What's also so remarkable about what happened in 2014 and now was that Brand defended himself in the mainstream media. Right? He wrote an article published in the mainstream media and he won. This time he's elected to defend himself on his own independent platform. Is that a victory or a loss, would you say? Well, don't be fooled. Since the story broke, his YouTube channel has grown by 20,000, even though he hasn't posted anything all week. Brand may yet emerge as the poster boy for the anti-establishment. Not that he isn't that already, but through this he may emerge as the undisputed flyweight champion, the hero raging against the cold, heartless machine. And who knows what will happen to the original story that launched 1,000 chips. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Criticizing those who think they're above the law is a little hypocritical, wouldn't you say?